I mean, this is become so economically corrupt that the whole system is on the edge of collapsing. And I go back to the debt problem. It's, to me, I think the thing that will collapse it is the debt problem. It's roughly 130% of GDP. Now, to put that in context, it has been climbing to that level in peacetime. If you look at World War II, the most it ever got up to was 119%. In other words, the debt today is greater than it was with the war economy in 1946. Now, that is extremely important. The reason it's a debt trap occurs when the growth in your income, and it doesn't matter whether it's a government or individuals or a company, when the growth of income is less than the growth of debt. And obviously, the growth of debt includes the interest, which is being rolled up. Now, that is now the situation again. We had this during the great financial crisis, when Lehman went bust. We had it in COVID, obviously. And we were just sort of getting our heads above water, or at least America was getting its head above water in terms of the debt trap, before we then started going down into that situation where income was not exceeding, if you like, the growth in debt. The growth in income was not exceeding the growth in debt. So, and the reason for that basically is you've got a slowdown in the US economy. You've also got inflation. And one way or another, the foreigners aren't really buying your debt. I mean, we've got China is not buying for her reasons, and nor is Japan. So the foreign involvement in acquiring debt, while since, I suppose, the Lehman crisis, their holdings in US Treasuries have doubled. In fact, the percentage of publicly held debt in foreign ownership has actually fallen from just under 50% to just under 30%. So they're just not participating in the growth of your debt. Now, we're now talking about a situation where foreigners are going to get less, if you like, in return for lending money to the US government because interest rates will be lowered. And this was clearly signaled at Jackson Hole by Jay Powell. And I think that is a huge, huge mistake. And already we can see the effect on the dollar. The dollar has entered on a chart, something called the death cross, where the price is below the 55-day moving average, and the 55-day moving average is crossed below the 250-day moving average. All these, the price and average is all declining. That is a death cross. It's a very, very bearish signal. And you can understand why. And so, I mean, the other side of it, of course, is gold. And this is why gold is going so well. I mean, under the gold price, you have a golden cross, which is the reverse of the death cross. So, you sell dollars, buy gold. I mean, it's actually as simple as that. But returning to the debt problem, this means that the debt is going to grow to the point where it just basically becomes impossible to fund. And the only way in which it can be funded is for interest rates to rise substantially, and at the same time for the government to cut its spending and to ensure that its budget is in balance. Now, here we are ahead of a presidential election in the presidential election year, and there's absolutely no hope of that. That is for sure. There's probably very little hope of it if what the two main contenders say about their policies come about. There's absolutely no hope of this happening in the next year or two. On top of that, you've got the problem that, for example, the SARM rule, which is based on the level of unemployment, when that rises to the point where it's exceeding the 3-month, 3-year moving average. However it's constructed, it's been a very reliable indicator of a recession. And this is part of the reason why Jay Powell is now looking to manage the economy rather than managing inflation, because the threat is that the economy will go into recession. The problem here is that when you get an economy running into recession, Keynesian economics says that government's got to step in and increase the deficit in order to support the economy. Yeah, but they're already at 130% to GDP, and the foreigners are already backing off buying more debt. So this is a real crisis. And it's just amazing that so few people seem to, and particularly the politicians, seem to have absolutely no idea that this is a problem. And markets continue blithely along in their own course without even thinking about this. I mean, the dollar has been the world's reserve currency for so long. The assumption in America is everybody needs the dollar. They will keep on buying the dollar. They must keep on buying the dollar because they need it for trade. They need it to go and buy commodities, whatever. But actually, if you look at what's happening, the world is moving away from the dollar. And the people in America are the last to understand this. And I have to say that whenever you get a currency crisis, it is always the foreigners first who actually understand what's going on, because they don't need to hold a foreign currency. They will be the first to sell it. And then at some later stage, the domestic users of the currency begin to realize that it's the currency going down, not prices rising. And that brings me on to another element of this, and that is inflation. The idea of inflation, as put about by the establishment and by the press, is rising prices, which can be controlled. I mean, the latest one is, Ms. Harris saying that, price gouging and all the rest of it, and we will stop it. So we'll do what Diocletian did. Not that she's ever heard of Diocletian, I'm sure. And that is, put price controls on.
Well, it was also that same playbook was brought up by Richard Nixon, 90-day price freeze, that sort of thing. Absolutely ineffective.
Absolutely. Dead right. Yeah. When they decided to suspend the Bretton Woods Agreement. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't work. It never works. But the point about this is that the driver of inflation is actually budget deficit and consumer borrowing to fund consumption. Those are the things that drive up prices, or, if you like, put the other way around and more accurately, drive down the purchasing power of the currency. And that is exactly the situation we still have, and it's going to get worse, particularly from the government end. And when you look at consumer behavior, savings in America have collapsed. They've gone negative. So, this is a disaster for the economy, where you have got a combination of a debt problem. You have got, a nasty recession, potentially a nasty recession, and I would actually call it a slump in the early stages of development. And on top of that, rising prices or a loss of purchasing power in the currency. This is the worst possible stagflationary scenario. Now, we had this back in 1976. And in 1975, actually, sterling collapsed against the dollar. It went down to around about, I think, $1.10, roughly where it got to in recent history, maybe even a bit lower than that. America came in and loaned us money in order to save the currency, which was fine. But obviously the condition was that the IMF come in, the IMF repays America, the IMF puts in controls, requirements, and all the rest of it, which takes it away from the politicians. And this is exactly what happened. The IMF said, right, you've got to balance your budget. Don't care. You raise your taxes, however you do it, but you've got to have a balanced budget. In order to fund the situation, interest rates rose to the point where we had 3 bond issues of 15, 15.25%, and 15.5%. Now, the problem that America faces is that there isn't someone like the IMF to come along and rescue them. I mean, it's just not there. Because apart from anything else, you own the IMF. I mean, figuratively speaking, the IMF might account in SDRs, but basically it's a dollar-based organization. And it's not in a position to rescue the dollar. So you've got you have a situation which is worse than we had potentially in 1976, when we were funding at 15.5% coupons. Just imagine what that does to the US economy. Is it avoidable? I think not. Why? Because of the debt trap. And I think, we've talked on this channel so frequently about the dangers in the banking system, zombie companies, and all these things, geopolitics, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the one thing which, above anything else, will end the fiat currency system is actually the collapse of the dollar because of the debt trap, which it is now entering into in just big time. That politicians have a completely different agenda from an economic agenda. And usually, I mean, a good politician will be able to lie to the electorate and get elected and pull the trick off that once he's elected, he or she is elected, then they can manage the economy sensibly and within sensible parameters. So it'll be interesting to see whether either Trump or Harris actually do take a more responsible economic course. I mean, in the case of Harris, I mean, she would have to have advisors around her to do this, because she's a lawyer and doesn't understand economics. I mean, that's absolutely clear. But we'll have to see, if you like, the proof in the pudding will be in the eating. That's sort of a phrase in English. I don't know whether you've got the equivalent in American. So I think there's an element of that in it. But there's a huge amount of ignorance. I mean, the whole idea of governments trying to manage economic outcomes, this is something that only really started with President Hoover and then was doubled down on by FDR. Until then, the perceived wisdom was, you don't mess with the economy. Okay, if there's a recession, then basically what that means is that all the dicey stuff has just got to get cleaned out. Don't stand there and do it, but just let everybody get on with it. It's Schumpeter's creative destruction, if you like. The creative destruction is something that should be happening all the time, but because you've got a cycle of growth and recession in bank credit, of course, Schumpeter's idea basically comes in spades every now and then just goes away. It's all about credit at the end of the day, and the availability of credit, interest rates, and so on and so forth, and the abuse of credit. And banks undoubtedly get carried away when the economy looks a bit better, and they sort of think, well, this is good, and then they start angling for market share by lowering interest rates, their lending rates below, if you like, a sensible commercial level for strategic purposes. I mean, we've known this. I mean, you can see this cycle going all the way back, but the mistake that the Keynesians made was to think that they could manage it. You can't manage it. You can't manage human nature. I mean, it's and that's really where the whole thing has gone horribly wrong. And I think, in a sense, what we now face is the end game, if you like, the end of that whole period of distortion, because distortions are being covered up, chuck credit at it, government credit if the banks won't do it. And the result is, they've had to distort the statistics. Statistics about prices. As John Williams shows, the whole thing is an absolute myth, the idea that inflation is at 2-3% or whatever, and it's been a myth for so long. And anyone, in America, or indeed in this country, who sort of looks at prices over a long period of time, they know they've been robbed, basically. The statistics don't reflect the degree to which they have been robbed. And I have to say that what we are seeing in this country is the situation is getting worse. It's getting worse because we've got a new government which it's pledged to look after the people who work, the working person. Yeah. Well, we're all working persons. But what they actually mean is they mean that they are going to hit the wealthy with malice aforethought. They want to rob the wealthy in order to keep the whole system going. They're talking about equalizing capital gains tax with income tax, which means that capital gains tax will go up to 40%. This is going to, they won't collect anything because people will just not realize their capital gains. And I guess that Kamala Harris is sort of thinking, well, the way to deal with that is tax the gains before you even make them. I mean, this is become so economically corrupt that the whole system is on the edge of collapsing. And I go back to the debt problem. To me, I think the thing that will collapse it is the debt problem. And it's not the private sector debt problem, it's the government debt problem. And it'll be made a lot worse as the economy tanks, because not only will interest rates have to rise, but it means that zombie companies will be going bust. Banks will be in trouble. So what happens? Well, you rescue these things. How do you rescue them? Well, you replace private sector credit with government credit, which basically means that the whole of this government borrowing thing is just spirals out of control. I think we are on the cusp of that. And once it starts rocking, I don't think it'll take terribly long for the whole system to come down. And I mean, quite frankly, I don't think anyone has any interest now in allowing this system to perpetuate. It's got to the point where it's actually robbing us completely of everything we have to support a government we can't afford.